Welcome to the stage, Adam Napolitano, the moderator for this session.
Thanks so much. Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thanks for taking the time to attend this session. Just as we get started, a couple of quick notes to familiarize yourself with the session before we get started. We'd love folks to engage via the chat if you want to share where you're calling in from or things like that. Happy to have that. And then we will be doing a live Q&A towards the end. If you have questions, please put those in the Q&A section of the tool so that we can find those more easily than if they were to go into the chat. We'll keep an eye on those, and we'll take it from there. And please don't forget to follow our sponsors and our hosts, IIoT World, on LinkedIn and X to stay up to date with key insights and information on these great topics. And with housekeeping taken care of, we're going to go ahead and start with our session on can AI predict and prevent the next supply chain disruption. And with that, I'd like to start by introducing our speakers. Maria, would you go ahead and please introduce yourself?
Yes, hi, thank you, Adam. Nice to meet everybody. My name is Maria Araujo. I am a technology and engineering executive with over 21 years of experience in the areas of digital transformation, AI and robotics. I've been in many industries. I started my career in aerospace, and I've been in pharma, medtech, food and beverage, and oil and gas and applied R&D. And most recently, I was vice president of innovation engineering at McCain Foods. And prior to that, I spent 5 years at Johnson & Johnson, leading supply chain innovation and digital transformation. Excited to be here.
Awesome. Thanks, Maria. Jamie, would you go ahead and introduce yourself, please?
Sure. My name is Jamie McIntyre Horstman. I have 25 years of experience with Procter & Gamble in the CPG space. I have led innovation everywhere from engineering and manufacturing to supply chain. And most recently, I am the director of demand forecasting for our family care business, which is Charmin and Bounty. I'm sure a lot of consumers are using those products here in the US. So happy to be here. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jamie. And finally, Srini, would you go ahead and introduce yourself, please?
Yeah. Hi, all. My name is Srinivasan Narayanan. I have 24 years of experience in manufacturing, business process, supply chain, and IT business transformations. I was in consulting. Now I work for Milwaukee Tool as a solution delivery lead for manufacturing, supply chain planning, demand planning, costing, and maintenance. So throughout my career, I worked for global clients like Motorola Mobile Devices, Sony Semiconductors, Honeywell Technologies, Aero Electronics, and so on. I was a speaker at Oracle AI World in last October, Vegas, talking about Oracle AI capabilities on maintenance cloud. Happy to be here. Very excited to be part of this team and this event. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. And my name again is Adam Napolitano. I'm with Triple Circle Partners, and I focus on helping manufacturers and solution providers build the right partner ecosystems to drive value and solve the big problems for manufacturing and energy clients around a number of use cases within IIoT and Industry 4.0. And with that, we can go ahead and get started. So first off, I want to dive into talking about how can AI enhance demand forecasting accuracy in supply chain, and what are some algorithms or models that are most effective for the industry in helping us make some progress in those areas. Jamie, would you mind kicking us off with some thoughts on that, please?
Sure. This is right up my alley. I think there's a few things that I wanted to talk about here. One, data integration and advanced algorithms like machine learning algorithms can help identify complex patterns, relationships within data, et cetera, much, much better than traditional forecasting methods. So we have two examples within Procter & Gamble in this space. One we call LDS, which is long-term demand sensing, and the other one is called Cannibalizer. So for LDS, it is using machine learning. It is using multiple models, and it's essentially picking the model that consistently yields the least error in the forecast. I like to think of this as when weather forecasters are trying to predict where where a hurricane might go, and they're saying they're using the North American model or the European model, it's similar to how we're doing our demand forecasting. There's multiple models in play, and it's saying which one typically has the least amount of error. It's looking at 3 years of history. It's finding things like seasonality and unique trends, outlier detection, all of those kinds of things, and building it in automation to eliminate outliers and make sure that we're replicating things that have seasonal patterns. The second one is called cannibalizer. So think of this as, if Costco is running a huge promotional event, not all of that volume is truly incremental. They're stealing some volume and some share from maybe a Target or a Walmart or some of the local grocery customers with folks that are coming in to buy just for that event. So this model is looking at history and saying, hey, typically when you put an event in for Costco, this amount of volume is actually cannibalized in the rest of the market. And it's doing that automatically for us in the forecast. So that's kind of like the longer term view. As we think of short term, there's real-time analytics that I think are also very important. We have a model that's looking just at the next 6 weeks. We call it Intelligent Daily Forecaster. And every single day, it is using 20 different models, again, very similar to LDS. And it is selecting the model that also has the least amount of error. And it's making an adjustment on the next 6 weeks forecast based on real-time data that's happening right now. So I think both things are important to incorporate.
Wow, that's a lot of great work that you're doing to help not only internally, but with some of your partners and distribution. That's awesome. Srini, you have any thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, I would basically expand what Jamie narrated. So basically traditional forecasting models relies on historical average, right? But AI role here is that it improves the accuracy by learning patterns, seasonality, and demand signals in near and real time. And she already talked about some of the models, and there are 3 types of models I can also refer. Something like the machine learning ensembles, like XGBoost or random forest for structured demand signals. And also we can have deep learning like LSTM and temporal CNN for volatile and promotional demand. And also there is one more model called probabilistic forecasting, just to provide the confidence percentage ranges instead of a single number. So the real value comes from blending our historical demand with external signals like promotions, market indexes, and customer behavior. So the key takeaway here is that AI doesn't replace planners. It augments decision making by highlighting risk, upsides, and downsides earlier. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. That's a lot of great information as well. And lastly, Maria, can you kind of expand on that or add some color from your experience on this?
Sure, and I think both Jamie and Sri kind of went deep into some of these pieces. So I'll kind of wrap it up a little bit. I think as we look at these different models that are out there, the classical time series methods, machine learning models can handle a lot of the cross-sectional predictors, and the more deep learning probabilistic methods can quantify the uncertainty, right? Because I think at the end of the day, if we go back to the top, a lot of these models, they are giving probability bands for us and drivers, whether it's promotion related, geopolitical tensions, and so forth. And then we still need to have the human component to assess those outputs from those algorithms to bring the context and judgment to those. So I think that's where I kind of want to add the piece, is that human connection to what these models are putting out. Because at the end of the day, a lot of these are ultimately giving us that probabilistic band, and some nonlinear relationship between promotions, for example, like Jamie was talking about at Costco, prices, seasonality, other macro factors. Today we have tariffs and geopolitical tensions and demands that are going up and down. And of course, also looking at forecasts for inventory and service level optimization. But with all of that and using the variety of algorithms that some examples were given, at the end of the day, we still have to have that human judgment looking at that and to make the ultimate decisions.
Great. That's great. Thank you so much. So I think we'll move on to another question. And this is a little bit broader in terms of some other maybe external factors that tie in. And that's talking about how supplier risk scoring models using AI can help identify early warning signals. And that can be anywhere from financial instability, quality issues. So that could be with suppliers or with the manufacturing process, or even things as broad as geopolitical exposure. And how can we leverage AI and some of these tools to help us make better decisions and create more resiliency within our supply chain? And Shri, I was hoping maybe you could help us start that one off.
Yeah. So when I started my career 24 years ago in a bicycle manufacturing company in India, so I was part of the strategic sourcing department. Every our supplier rating and the risk scoring used to be a quarterly event. Actually, most of the time we were firefighting because we did not have the proper process and we were in a reactive mode. We internally will work with the buyers, and the suppliers, the quality issues, all sorts of things we had to face. But now in the widely globalized economy, commercialized and industrial environment, AI plays a key role to switch from reactive to proactive. As Adam, you have mentioned, AI can makes it continuously monitor, supplier quality issues and delivery delays and their financial statuses, and also like geopolitical issues like trade embargo and restricted suppliers, restricted sites, so that we will not get into those trouble. So those kind of dynamically changing environment, AI can help us via we have the state of the art cloud ERP system. On top of it, AI can be one of the layer in that we have the supplier connectivity. Also, AI can get the data from outside of our system, and it can help us to surface early warnings before disruption happens. And so basically, value is not replacing suppliers, but it is a buying time to dual source, to build inventory, and also renegotiate. So essentially, the shift from reactive to proactive is where resilience really improves.
Awesome. Thank you. Maria, I know you had some thoughts on that.
Yes. So interestingly, I was reading actually a report from McKinsey yesterday talking about how manufacturers have relationships with suppliers, and if we look at tier one suppliers, about 95% of respondents to this McKinsey survey said they have a good risk awareness of those suppliers and a good relationship with those tier one suppliers. So, but then when we get to tier two, that number drops on average to about 35%. And when you get into the tier three supplier, you're looking at 10% or below. So as we think about risk scoring, we got to think also in these different dynamics of tier one, tier two, tier three suppliers and how they may affect, right? So as we think the role that AI can play into the space, of course, AI can consolidate a lot of those internal and external signals. So from those suppliers, financial metrics, credit risk, defect rates, ESG indicators, and geopolitical exposure. And then, of course, from that, create those health scores, right? And I like to think of supplier risk and supplier risk models as kind of early warning radars, right? They are, and you need to really be deep into it. And again, which is why I mentioned this interesting McKinsey report, because again, as you go deeper into the supply chain, that's where a lot of the risk lies, right? We all know that there's risk, there's tariffs going on, there's geopolitical, and I think there is a fairly good understanding of the immediate dangers of some of our respective supply chains. But as you get deeper into not understanding that supply chain into tier two, tier three, that's where a lot of the dangers lie. And a lot of the issues we've had in the past with big disruptions came from a lot of that from that, right? So again, it's very key. And I think that's where AI can play a big role as we get into that data. And of course, that data has to be available. And I know we'll get into that topic later. Really understand that depth of the supply chain and how it can impact. And again, signals to ingest, financials, right? Liquidity ratios, payment behavior, operational metrics like quality metrics, on-time delivery, lead time variability, and of course, market and trade, right? Order cancellations, volume swings, the geopolitical aspects, country risks, sanctions, and so forth. And then, of course, unstructured data as well, media, news, legal filings, social media. There's a lot there as well that needs to feed this piece, right? And of course, physical indicators like congestions in ports, satellite imagery information, and so forth. So that's, I think, where AI can play a role. The key is getting into that data and the depth that's needed to get into.
Sure, that's great. So I think moving on here, and this is an interesting topic that I want to get some opinion on here is. And this is going to have some variability based on the industry segment. But when we're looking at balancing the need for transparency and data sharing, let's talk a little bit about maybe some of the concerns around data privacy, security, competitive advantage, because I think that's, especially when we're talking about using LLM, public modeling, there can be some different concerns than if you've internalized this and you're building it all within your own stack. So maybe if we can talk a little bit about that transparency and the data sharing, and Maria, I'd love to get your thoughts to start that off.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Adam. Yes, I think this is an area of that a lot of work is still needed, right? Again, if I just go back to that comment I made about the tier 1, 2, 3, the visibility gets very dark, let's say, as you go deeper into the supply chain. And sharing data is a major roadblock today as you look into the depth of the supply chain. So I think in order to try to resolve some of that, I think the key message is, we need to share the signal, not so much the data, right? It's the high level trends that are going to let us really understand what might be happening, and then cooperate on those insights. Because at the end of the day, there's a lot, a lot of this information it's for the public good in many ways, right? So I think. So the way to think about it is a little bit, again, what data needs to be shared to share the signal and the trends, right? And so in order to solve some of this piece, I think it's about governance, obviously privacy techniques, and we can talk a little bit about that, agreements, right? And really think about what matters, right? I think, I've been in many industries, as I mentioned, and in many companies, and many large companies. And I think the general approach is all data is private. We want to protect a lot of the data. But I think we need to take that step back and what data really needs to be protected first, and really be able to categorize that data, and what data is really intellectual property sensitive or competitiveness sensitive, and what's not. Because again, for our own good, we need to be able to share some of that, and we need our suppliers to share that, so we can have, again, that depth of visibility. So I think there's an opportunity for companies to balance transparency using, for example, privacy preserving AI features like federated learning, right? Where you can send, where the models can learn the information with private data, but not necessarily share the data. Tier data sharing agreements, encryption, role-based access, and so forth. But again, from a practical perspective, is data governance and understanding, role-based access, some of the federated pieces I mentioned, legal and commercial agreements with suppliers and 3PLs and so forth. I mentioned already federated learning. There's a variety of techniques you can use, like secure multi-party computation, differential privacy, and synthetic data as well is another key opportunity. And then, of course, transparency mechanisms as well. But at the end of the day, the last one I'd like to mention is standardization, right? So common data schemes, and there have been cross industry efforts around creating standards and APIs that people can share the data while maintaining the privacy as well. So those are some ideas and some thoughts. But again, I think it's definitely an open topic and a great opportunity for many industries to tackle.
Awesome. Yeah, lot of great insight there. Thank you. And Jamie, I know you had some thoughts on this as well.
Sure. I mean, within P&G, one of the things we do a lot is to in regards of this particular topic is to do homegrown type platforms. So if you think simply, in a simple way of Chat GPT, we have our own Chat PG, right? So we've built that internally. It's an MLM that is private. It is not going out to the world and publicly announcing things that we're working on. So you can go that route. You can build things kind of like internally and not have something on a platform that's available to everyone. And then I think culturally, we hit on this a little bit, but the training piece. So every single year, we are required to do secure data sharing, privacy training, and we require that of all of our stakeholders as well. So I think it's very important to remind folks of just what are all the rules and the regulations that are out there, and to pause and think and be mindful and be in the moment when we're talking about sharing any type of information.
Awesome. That's great. Yeah, it's a big topic, and just one thing that I heard from this, and something that I've seen even before it was AI, was trying to build common data out of things that people started thinking were proprietary that maybe were not. Like, I'll take it from an area that I know, maintenance and reliability, where it's condition monitoring signals and the frequencies on a pump. Those aren't really proprietary when you're looking at vibration. There may be some variability based on the process it's running, but a pump running in one factory versus another, you're not going to be able to really tell that when you anonymize the data. People were still very leery about sharing that in the past, even though it really couldn't uncover those things. So I think there's education that we need to continue to do about how this data is being consumed, how it's used to build models, and how it can impact privacy. And obviously, there are some great concerns with that if it's going to reveal recipes or trade secrets or anything like that, or if, maybe not for manufacturing, but maybe for our medical device and things like that, patient information or medical information that could be revealed. So we do want to be mindful of how we're balancing that sharing and educating folks about how we do that sharing. So I think that there's a lot that needs to be done on education, internally and externally, as we build these out. But to kind of move on, I think, again, a pretty broad question here. So I think we can spend a minute on this one, which is talking about collaboration between industry, government, and suppliers to help us make a broader strive and move towards resiliency in a global supply chain. So we one of the examples we saw a few years ago was the major disruptions that came out of the pandemic to the global supply chain, and how do we work cross-functionally amongst industry, government, and the supply chain at large to try and build that resiliency in. So Maria, I know that given your background, you've got a lot of thoughts on this topic.
Yeah, sure. So I like to think, at the end of the day, resilience is a public good, as I mentioned before, right? It's cheaper to share the early signals than to rebuild after a blackout, right? As we saw, for example, even during the pandemic. So I think, to really encourage that collaboration, it's really multi-stakeholder ecosystem. So industry consortia, private partnerships, to create that shared data exchange. And I think a great example of that, that I personally have been a part of, and is, of course, still work in progress. There is a manufacturing essay institute called CESME, which is the Clean Energy Manufacturing Institute. And during the pandemic, many companies are member of that. So at the time I was at Johnson & Johnson, P&G is there, and various other large companies. We started creating, there was a creation of a Smart Manufacturing Executive Council, and exactly part of it was tackling this topic, right? So again, it's an industry consortium made up of key manufacturers, large manufacturers, middle-sized manufacturers, and some small, but also a lot of the suppliers. And so trying to create an ecosystem to enable this, exactly this. How can we get better visibility into the supply chain, into the different tiers, through a variety, through schema, metadata, and APIs, standardization, so we can actually get the visibility. And again, going back to the concept, what data can be shared Of course, we all keep the data that we feel is competitive and private, but there's data that can be shared. And how do we standardize on that so we can get a better view of the supply chain and of the different tiers? So I think that's the key. It's really being able to come together as an industry consortium for the greater good. And so then when there are times of the pandemic is an example, of course, but even now with tariffs, there are options. One of the best definitions I've heard, this is not from me, but what is resilience, true resilience? Resilience is having the ability to have options when something happens. When you don't have options, that means you're not resilient. And so here, having the visibility will allow you to do that. So again, industry consortium, so we can look for things and anonymize, share data pools, like transport ETAs, demand signals, standardization and interoperability, things like, for example, common identifiers like GS1 and so forth. Again, that public sector partnership with customs, port authorities, regulators for very good visibility of flows, crisis, and real-time alerts in that space. And then, of course, the shared digital infrastructure, right? Neutral platforms that are not vendor locked, and they have standardized APIs and data format exchanges, so you can share data between different machines, whether you're looking at a machine on a factory floor, all the way up, so that data can be really understood commonly without being vendor locked. So those are some thoughts. And again, it's a big problem still and a big opportunity. But yes, those are some of my thoughts on that.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. And Shri, anything you would like to add to that, those points that Maria made?
Yeah. Maria covered extensively, on the subject. But I will just address some of the key one's IT side of this topic. So as we all know that, as you all mentioned, no company alone can predict global disruptions, right? So it requires collaborations. We talked about resilience in supply chain a lot. So it requires shared visibility between across the suppliers, customers, governments, all these stakeholders which involved in a business. For example, some of the tools, ERP tools, currently they work in silos. For example, OTM, they used primarily for logistics, and supplier portal is for supplier and us, and also likewise we have the customer connectivity tools. So in the AI worlds, it can talk to all three different silos ERP entities, and it can can have the common dashboard, which will help us to have more visibility in so that it can help us to improve the supply chain resiliency. So when we already talked about the data sharing, we need to think about one aspect. When we data sharing means it is a purpose driven data sharing, right? It is not about hiding something. Instead of if I have the connectivity with the supplier can view my on hand, they can view their open invoices. So it's a purpose driven. So in that ways, the whole all these stakeholders in the supply chain can be benefited.
Awesome. That's great. All right. I think we're going to move on and maybe switch gears a little bit and maybe come back down from a very broad, global geopolitical area. And let's talk more about maybe AI and ML as it pertains to transportation and logistics, obviously a big piece of a supply chain. So can we talk maybe a little bit about real-time data, how that's helping with creating efficiencies or cost savings, helping minimize disruptions? And this can be anything from maybe looking at traffic or weather, geopolitical potentially when we're talking about global supply chains. But what are you seeing, or what are you using in your organizations to help with some of these challenges and opportunities? And Shri, I'll kick it to you first on this one.
Yeah, sure. So so the logistics disruptions, it rarely comes from one event, and they are the reaction combines. They are the result of all various events. Maybe some of the events are not related. It's the result of those events happening on globally. For instance, traffic, weather, port congestion, or some labor union strike, which we not even aware of across the globe, right? Somewhere in the world. So, and so in this situation, as I have already talked about the OTM, there are so many softwares. We have it for OTM and also the transportation management transportation management as well. So AI can combine with these tools, and it can predict the early delays and dynamically reroute the shipments instead of waiting for the delays to happen. And so I would say the biggest savings doesn't come from the cheapest freight. They come from avoiding missed deliveries and last minute expediting.
Makes a lot of sense. And Jamie, I know this is something that you or your team are probably dealing with a fair bit, and would love to get your thoughts on this.
Sure. A couple of examples that I've dealt with over the last decade. I would say the first one has to do with weather. Sometimes I feel like we have to become full blown meteorologists. I think some of the data platforms that we have today make it a whole lot easier to be alerted to weather situations coming in the next 1, 3, 7 days so that we can be better prepared. And it can also help us, come to us, like the system comes to us with decisions. For instance, delivering to the Pacific Northwest region of the United States is a challenge in the winter, especially when you're coming from areas like St. Louis. So we have an automated tool that helps us make decisions very quickly on whether we need to route and actually ship out of our West Coast, so out of California, and go directly up the coast if we have, situations of weather coming through in the winter that would cause us to be delayed. Or we have the ability to even ramp up inventory that we send to our customers ahead of time so that they can be adding to their safety stock by 1, 2, 3 days in order to avoid having stockouts if we are delayed getting there in the weather. So that's one example. I think another one, geopolitically, we have a lot of contract manufacturers in Mexico that are bringing goods into the United States. We had maybe 2 years ago, a lot of border closures coming between Mexico and the United States. And these are very unpredictable. However, if you are utilizing kind of scraping of unstructured data, you can get similar types of alerts of, hey, this is building. We should be starting to build inventory of trailers in certain areas of the country in order to cross at a different location and just start to kind of work those solutions ahead of time and be more proactive such that you don't get stuck, in a 10-day delay of getting anything across the border. So just a couple of examples of how we're using that.
Awesome. Some great examples that I think are pretty important for a lot of folks. Moving ahead here, let's talk a little bit about data sources. So, obviously we're going to talk a little bit about internal data, and I think we talked a little bit about some of those areas now, but we can dig in a little bit more. And external. So what are really critical resources that help you build reliable AI models or AI predictions using those internal and external sources? And Jamie, I think you kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but would love you free to expand on it
Sure.
from this ones.
Sure. I think internally, it's really like a three-legged stool. So you have your historical sales data and specifically your shipment versus forecast data to understand the nuances there. You have your inventory levels internally, and then you have your production data, throughput, PR, rates, etc. If any one of those legs falls, then everything falls.
Yeah.
So think of that like if your production rates go way down, your inventory levels are going to drain faster than you expect, and you're going to lose sales to your customers. You're going to ship less than you ultimately could have. If your customers' sales start going through the roof and shipping above your forecast levels, very similarly, your inventory levels are going to fall, your production can't keep up or ramp up fast enough. So I think those are the three kind of key things that interact with each other that you have to have within one single model to help, with exception reporting, alerts, and even some automated decision-making on where to send product, where to stock up more, where to change your safety stock levels, all those kinds of things. But I think one other interesting example, and I think this ties in with the external data as well, is understanding some of the some of the external trends. So for instance, price matching is something that we deal with in the CPG space quite often. So if, Amazon does a deal, Walmart's going to match, or vice versa. And it's hard to predict this sometimes. And so that's where things like, again, kind of scraping the unstructured data and finding those things to alert you to these proactively versus waiting until you start running out of inventory, cutting your customers, and then trying to figure out what's happening. Believe me, 3 to 5 years ago, we were on that side of it, but we're now getting a lot closer to the other side. Another one that we use in the family care business, so think of Bounty and Charmin, and think of all of the geopolitical things that have influenced you to buy toilet paper recently over the last 5 years. COVID was really the very first instance that started training consumers to panic buy toilet paper because it's one of those things you never want to run out of. We saw a similar spike back in October of last year when there was a port strike. We saw another spike when there was going to potentially be a second strike in January of last year. We saw a mini panic buy around the tariffs this year. So this is something that we're trying to wrap our minds around, get some history on, and start to build into our AI and machine learning models that we already have. This is a more challenging thing because it can come from anywhere. It's not a consistent thing that's going to cause it, but it's definitely something that we need to get our arms wrapped around for the future.
And it's a little different than what we typically see, like winter storms or weather events where people stock up on perishable food or, bread, things like that. That's a little bit easier to predict than some of these broader events where, with personal care goods and things that have a longer shelf life, obviously. But that's interesting. Maria, I wanted to kind of tap your thoughts on this, on internal and external data.
Sure. So yeah, I think, obviously if we go through what types of sources could be, there are many, right? And I'll focus maybe on an example from my past. So I think, if I look at, for example, things like food and beverage, right? I think data from MES, production rate, run hours, and then even sensor data from the actual production line. But then tying back to things like ERP, right? So orders, inventory, procurement, and so forth to drive that. And then the demand from the planning systems. Those are internal pieces that have a direct impact and sources of that. If I use an example from pharma, for example, so coming from my time at J&J, during the COVID vaccine, for example, and then really for cold chain type of shipments. So if you think of many drugs today, they need to be shipped to cold chain. Many of them in very cold temperatures. COVID vaccine was closer to minus 40F. So these are critical shipments that have to stay within that temperature through the entire time. So things we were looking at for those were things like weather and climate, but also looking at customs at airports, and if you look at airport data, customs, the weather during the airport, and even transit time through airports. We had airports, for example, that were in certain countries that it took a long time for our shipments to get past customs, and that could impact, of course, the product. And so things like that. Those are some examples of external sources combined again with internal sources, and then in the shipments, for example, for pharma, we actually have IoT devices in those shipments that are monitoring, of course, the time in transit. They're monitoring the temperature throughout the transit time. Some of them were historical data, like you only get the data after the shipment, but then we switched that to real-time sensing. So we could actually, in real time, monitor the temperature of the shipments, monitor the location of the system. So not only could we, if it's stuck at an airport, we knew exactly where it was, and we could, immediately using algorithms, reroute some of these packages to get to the destination faster or within the time they needed to get to for the validity of the product. So those are some examples of sources.
Awesome. And Shri, I know that this is something that you'd like to weigh in on a little bit as well. So please give us some thoughts.
The panel already extensively covered the different types of data sources. I would like to add a couple of points. So basically, the data quality matters here more than the volume. And, the clean, timely, and trusted data wins. And, one more point I would like to make is, we should start small and, expand intelligently in this rapidly evolving AI environment.
Great. And this has been it's been presented in some different ways throughout some of the other sessions today, which I hope folks have been able to attend some. But let's talk a little bit about AI agents and how they can help orchestrate supply chain decisions. And that can go anywhere from the sourcing end all the way through to logistics. So wherever you may be using those or have some thoughts and how they can help handle disruptions and maybe take the human out of the loop or bring the human in to help with major exceptions that require human intervention. And Jamie, I'd love you to kick that one off if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. The top one that comes to mind is on the sourcing side, but I think we're seeing it sourcing, inventory management, logistics, transportation, all of it. I can give a couple of examples. Within sourcing, we see agentic AI working in the space of order and invoice management with our suppliers directly. We also see it with RFQ automation, so request for quotes. So anytime we're trying to quote a business out or bid a business out, we have that very automated at this point. We're also using agentic AI to do supplier performance assessments. So think of as quality, cost, reliability, and kind of raise, we talked a little bit earlier, and a risk profile on, do we need to consider a backup supply? Do we need to consider quoting this business out, bidding this business out, et cetera? For inventory management, we have a agentic AI that is making real-time decisions and making real-time adjustments to our safety settings based on machine learning that is taking place. For logistics and transportation, I would say the biggest thing is track and trace. So I remember being on a customer sales team 10 years ago, and I was required to call and follow up with every single truck that was being sent to our customer and make sure it was being delivered on time. That was our track and trace, physically picking up the phone and calling. We now have agentic AI that does that. We now have GPS tracking that does that. But we even have agentic AI that can call and reschedule appointments at the warehouse and at the receiving distribution center, which I think has saved hours and hours and hours of our resources time so that we can go put that to a much more value added space in the supply chain.
Great. Yeah, it's a long way to come in a very short period of time on that for sure. Shri, how about you? Thoughts on agentic AI and agents that can help in what you're doing?
So as we all know that agentic AI acts like a digital coordinators. They monitor signals and detect exceptions and recommend or trigger actions within guardrails. At Milwaukee Tool, agentic AI it's a trend now because there are various use cases we have identified to implement Oracle out of the box agentic AI. One is on the supply planning, so the exception handling and monitoring, and also in the supply we have around 100 plus supply planners. So when they release the recommendations, review the recommendations, they enter the notes. So one more agentic AI we are working on to build is that it can go through the notes for a particular combination or item or item supplier, and it can summarize the notes entered by various planners. And when it comes to inventory side, on the shipping side, we are working on to build an AI agent on the improve the efficiency for the shipping clerk. It can automatically pack the shipments and identify the inventory at the right locators and right places, and also it can generate the shipping documents. And on the another use cases on the maintenance side, so we're exploring couple of agents, maintenance work order builder. For example, we want our maintenance technicians to spend more time on working on the missions, fixing problems, make sure there is no downtime, ideally in an ideal world. So we don't want them to spend time on the computer. So once they perform all the maintenance technicians have provided with iPad. So once they're done performing maintenance tasks, they can call the agent and they can key in, hey, this is an asset. I performed this transaction, this fix. Can you go ahead and create the work order and issue this raw material and report the resource? So in Milwaukee side, we are looking at the various ways to adapt agentic AI which can improve the process efficiency and reduce the cost. And there are two more points I would like to mention. The last October in Vegas, I attended Oracle's first ever agentic AI hackathon. And tomorrow in Chicago downtown Hyatt Hotel, there is one more day-long event. So I'll be traveling to Chicago tomorrow to attend Oracle-sponsored AI agent event actually.
Very cool. And Maria, what about you? What are you seeing with agents and how that's impacting some of the things that you're seeing and doing?
Yeah, so similar to what has been shared already, but I'll focus in on a different use case a little bit. If we look at our production lines, and of course there's control systems, monitoring data from sensors and doing control actions in real time. And I think this is where we're beginning to see the roles of agents to do prediction. You can actually simulate in real time based on a variety of different sensor data from your production line. And as it goes back into the control process, simulate a variety of different scenarios using agents to then determine what's the best control point now for this line to reach a certain optimization for whatever it may be, for whether it's that product, that run for that shift, it may be different things. So I think that's an area where we're seeing the power of agentic AIs to really be able to, again, simulate quickly all these different scenarios based on what's happening right now. And then either automatically control the line through the control systems, which there are a variety out there, or inform the operators on the line, this is what you should do, and these are the different scenarios, and this is the optimal way to operate something right now. So I think that's a slightly different area from what's already been covered, really looking at the production line itself.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. I want to hit one more question because I think this is an important one, and then we'll get to some of the Q&A from our audience. There's been a lot of talk and a lot of studies that money is being spent on AI, but we're not necessarily seeing tangible ROI in certain cases. And there's a number of different industry publications and things like that. But if we can weigh in here a little bit on how are you able to measure effectiveness or ROI of some of the tools and processes that you're implementing using AI so that it can help foster more adoption within other organizations. Shri, would you like to kick off with some thoughts on that?
Yeah. So when we talk about AI, it is all exciting, automation or decision making, process efficiency, etc. But it comes with a cost, right? Like number of tokens, number of users, So the thing is that the real challenge in AI and ROI is that success often means nothing happened. There is no disruption, there is no breakdown, right? Business runs smooth, it's a success actually, right? So we do not have to firefight. So we measure value through avoided cost, as I have mentioned, fewer expeditions and faster recovery and high service level. Because when we implemented Oracle 4 months ago, our distribution center service level went way below our target actually. So everybody was freaking out. Do whatever you can do to improve the service level. So those kind of disruptions can be avoided. And the digital twins help quantify what would have happened without AI, turning resilience into a measurable business outcome.
Jamie, some thoughts from your perspective on how you're measuring the ROI of these adoptions.
Sure. I do want to say, set a baseline though, of I feel like a lot of CIOs are being pressured to dive into this space of AI, of machine learning, of all agentic AI, of all the things. And I think it's very important to define your top priority in problem statements before you start looking at all of the platforms that exist. Because just trying to get on board and get quickly involved in as many platforms as possible that exist is going to cost a lot of money. But you really need to focus on what you need to solve and what of those technology platforms is going to solve it. So first of all, just don't throw your money away to say that you're in the space of AI. Make sure you've truly defined your problem statement, and then go after the 2 to 3 platforms that exist and narrow down the scope from there. I think the other thing is you very clearly have to have a before and after picture. So I agree with everything that was already said, as far as there are ways, you're going to have unplanned downtime that exists now that in the future will not exist if you're using some of these platforms and technologies. But you have to define the cost of a stop or the cost of an hour of downtime and make sure that that goes into the equation for how you're developing the ROI of this particular investment that you're going to make.
Awesome. And Maria, any final thoughts on ROI?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I like to echo what Jamie said about understanding the problem, right? I think that's the first and foremost, right? You can't start really these projects just thinking, oh, let me just bring in technology and hope it will work out, right? Because it most likely won't. And throughout my career and in the different roles I've seen, I've seen, things that, the ROI at the end of the day was not there. Right? The cost to implement certain things versus the benefit that they brought just wasn't there. So again, understanding what the problem is, understanding what the size of the problem is very important, and that should drive anything from there. And here in my experience and what I've been involved, the areas that I've seen the most substantial ROI as it relates to these types of technologies have been in the automation space. So when you think about robotics and leveraging AI, computer vision for automating tasks that are either manual today or tasks that are manual and the quality is not there or not good enough, and actually a computer vision system with AI can do better. That's where I've seen the best ROI in a variety of the projects that I've worked with. But again, that doesn't mean that it's a given, but it's where I've seen, but a lot of those are also very costly, but again, the cost, so you have to still look at it very carefully, but that's an area that I've seen substantial ROI. It's in the robotic space and computer vision combined with AI to automate tasks that are manual, and the computer couldn't possibly do it better and actually increase the capacity of the line. So those are some examples of areas where I see, but again, it goes back to what's the problem. And not all problem. The technology solution is not the solution to all the problems. I think that's the key.
100%. Awesome. Well, with that, I want to kind of grab some questions while we have a few minutes from the audience. So I'm going to pick a couple of these out, and if we don't get to them, we'll get answers to folks. But let's go back to when we earlier talked about data sets and some of the mappings and things like that. And the question is, what mechanisms exist when AI encounters conflicting or missing data, especially in things like upcoming geopolitical situations? And I'll open that up to whoever would like to take a stab at answering that.
I mean, I can take a stab. So as far as missing or conflicting data, I mean, that to me kind of links back to the example I was giving, especially around geopolitical, around trying to predict the next crisis that is going to cause us to have panic buying and cause us to spike and then run out of, again, toilet paper in my case. And this has been a real challenge. And it kind of gets at both the conflicting and missing data, because we don't know exactly what data to kind of intertwine with our demand forecast. And we don't necessarily have a ton of history. We don't have years and decades of history, say, like where we've had these panic buys occur. It's only been in the last couple of years. So what we've been doing to tackle it is utilizing at least what data we do have to do regression models and things like that on the data to try to pick out what were the key things that are causing these reactions in history. And then that helps us determine what keywords, this is how what keywords we are using to scrape the unstructured data right now to cause us to say, okay, in this area of the country, we're seeing these keywords have a hit rate of X, and that typically would cause us to start to spike in orders. So it is like, when you're missing data or when it's conflicting data or you just don't have enough, you have to piece it together and still add a layer of manual, touch to that until you get to a place where you have enough to feed it from an automated standpoint.
Great. Shri, Maria, anything you want to add to that, or can we grab another question?
I would like to just add that, again, it depends on the application, but coming from a regulated industry like medtech and pharma and explainability of AI systems, this question kind of touches a little bit at the heart of it. I think when you have missing data or conflicting data, first of all, is understanding that that's the case, because I think the biggest danger is actually having missing data or conflicting data and yet get an output from an algorithm that you're not aware that it made either an assumption that could lead you in a different direction. And of course, when you get into regulated industries, that's a key conflict, right? So I think that's just something to think about. Now, as you get into whether you're training models, et cetera, of course, there's synthetic data you can use for some missing data. But again, you still got to understand what you're doing and what the outcome that you want out of what you're doing. So again, I think the key in this topic is understanding the context and understanding that you have missing data or conflicting data, what your outcome is, and how do you manage that, which could be through synthetic data, or in some cases, it may be that you may not be able to leverage that at all, depending what it is that you're working on.
Shri, anything else to add, or do you want me to jump into another question?
Yeah. So one quick point, no, as Jamie mentioned, no, in this situation, no, we can have the human in the loop. If AI is as good as having the good data. If there is missing or conflicting data, on those occasions, we have to involve the human and his input, so that AI models can work better.
Great. And then I think we have time for one more quick one before we let everybody go to the next session. So we know that AI can help us better manage risk, but how can the industry encourage suppliers to implement more security and resilience practices, and how can we use the data and reflect it back to the suppliers? So we'd love to hear some quick thoughts on that.
So, for example, some of the products, which I'm reviewing, and also like Oracle product, they have the guardrails to protect the security, and also the supplier. Also, we have the roles in ERP environment. They have the role-based access, security control. If I do not have the role to, let's say, I'm a buyer, I cannot access the customer master. I have the role which can have access only to the supplier-related information. So likewise, some of the advanced AI tools have got the guardrails to protect the company data within, the company firewall. Also within the organization, if somebody do not have the access, they cannot access those data, even with AI tools actually.
Awesome. Any last thoughts, Maria or Jamie, on that?
No.
Okay.
No, nothing else to add.
All right. Well, great. You know what? We're right on time. So I want to thank Maria and Jamie and Shri for the great discussion, the great answers. Thank you so much for that. I want to thank the IIoT World team for producing this great session. And most importantly, I want to thank all of you for attending. And now we're getting ready to move on to the next session, which is AI Advantage 2026. How U.S. manufacturers can convert innovation into real ROI. We hope many of you will be able to attend that. And thanks so much, and have a great day.